3, 2, 1.
We'd like to welcome you to another edition of Grok Talk, brought to you by New Hampshire's leading conservative blog site, GraniteGrok.com. We are your feared extremist, right-wing, hard-charging, gun-toting, opinionated, outspoken, rabble-rousing, letter-writing, radio microphone-stomping conservatives and rational libertarians. So get ready for more news and opinion you could only get from GraniteGrok.com.
Grok Talk.
You missed the stuff that happens on the break. They were having a nice discussion about HP and technology, and we're not going to go there right now, maybe at the end of the show. But this is Grok Talk. Welcome back, coming to you live and pre-recorded later in the week from the beautiful CNHT studios in Concord, New Hampshire. Always a pleasure to be here. A little cold this morning. It's warming up, though. It's been kind of nice the last week, so not as bad as it's been. And that's a good thing because it's been kind of lousy weather up here, but we're not here to talk about the weather. That's coming up in segment 4. In the meantime, what we'd like to do is bring on Greg Kline from Red, Maryland. So we needed a voice from the state who is on the ground and near the riots in Baltimore. And this is our guy. We've had him on the show before. Greg, good morning.
Good morning. How are you guys?
Good. How are you?
Good.
Good. Well,
Watching in horror, so let's hear the reality from the ground, as it were.
There's a lot.
All right, where do you guys want to start?
Well, you know, that's a good question, and I've been thinking about it for 2 or 3 days now because there's so many things we could talk about. You know, the city systemics, the police force, the Dem lock on power, corruption, incompetence, what sparked it, Freddie Gray, the injuries, the outside provocateurs, the 180-degree change in evidence, the overcharging by the prosecutor. I honestly don't know where to start, so I'm kind of hoping you can help us out.
And David Clark's always sanguine opinions.
So give us yours. I mean, you're there. You're in Maryland. You know,
right.
You know people in politics and in the city and the governor and everything. What would you be writing about with regard to this situation?
Well, I'll tell you, one of the things I'm writing about right now that we'll have up at Red, Maryland this afternoon is some thoughts on these indictments that came out. And you guys, even in that little intro, I think kind of touched on something that I think is on our side of things we need to be a little bit careful about. I think there's been this knee-jerk reaction by conservatives with these indictments coming out against the police that somehow this is entirely politically motivated, that these are baseless charges against good cops, and that everything's being overcharged. You got to be careful about that, guys. There's no question that there's political motivation here. There's no question that our Baltimore City State's Attorney, and I saw one national commentator refer to it as the Maryland State's Attorney. The prosecutor represents the city of Baltimore, and she was just recently elected. It's not the entire state. In fact, our Maryland Attorney General has refused to get involved in the case and do his own investigation. That's another subject. Some of the reporting that had been going on even this week that somehow Mr. Gray had inflicted these injuries on himself, that's kind of been debunked. In fact, the source of that story from a local D.C. television station was interviewed in Baltimore and disputed that account and he was the only guy who was in the paddy wagon with the guy. The other thing is there's been this kind of internet rumor, really has been completely debunked, that Mr. Gray was involved in some sort of previous injury suit where he had serious spinal cord injuries. That's been completely debunked, but it's still making the rounds and people are relying on it. Look, guys, this isn't like Ferguson or the Eric Garner case where you had somebody who was actively resisting arrest and the police had to take action that resulted in the guy's death, either by using force in self-defense or someone was injured as a result of actively resisting arrest. This was a guy who was in police custody. He was secured in a police vehicle and suffered injuries during that period of time. Now, what exactly happened is disputed, and there's not a whole lot that's known about it. But it's pretty clear that it's very possible that these police officers, and there is a history of this in Baltimore City, we shouldn't be blinded to this fact, of giving, defendants rough rides and things like that. And the fact is, this guy was arrested. You can argue whether he was resisting police by running away and certainly this guy has a criminal record. There's no question about that. But the state's attorney basically made the determination there wasn't probable cause even to arrest him in the first place. That's probably going to be one of the hottest factual disputes, but he wasn't actively engaged in a crime at the time he was arrested. So I'd be a little leery before we start talking about 180 degrees turns on the evidence and overcharging. There may be some overcharging, and the process will certainly play out. But we've got bad cops in Baltimore City and have for a long time, which brings me back to kind of the one of the most interesting things about this entire ordeal is that's extraordinary. And I think, this is something you guys have probably been talking about as well. This week we've had the mayor of Baltimore, and of course, Al Sharpton's come to town to make things a lot worse, trying to blame, you had this extraordinary statement from Al Sharpton defending the mayor of Baltimore City, saying that it's not her fault. These things have been going on for decades. And I'm thinking, well, that's probably true, but there hasn't been a Republican mayor in the city of Baltimore since 1968, and there hasn't been a Republican elected to a city office there as city council since 1939. And we've only had, 5 years that we've had a Republican governor in the state of Maryland during that time as well. So Al Sharpton has to be blaming the Maryland Democratic Party
and especially O'Malley, who's been both mayor and governor.
Well, that's true. And the biggest victim in this has clearly been Martin O'Malley, because he cut short a money-making trip to Ireland to come back, and when he came back and gave speeches, he got tough questions, which he's not used to getting asked, which he wasn't asked when he was governor, frankly. And he got heckled in Baltimore City. Even David Simon, the producer of The Wire, who still says he would vote for him, by the way, so don't lose sight of that, came out and basically blamed all of this on Martin O'Malley and his mass arrest policies.
Well, those policies have largely worked. They worked in New York under Giuliani, and I think they helped Baltimore a little bit. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't treat the arrestees well. You still have to properly secure them and not beat them up. And who the heck knows what? One of the pieces of the story is, as part of the ride, he was not secured and may have been thrashing himself around, but. Well, yeah, that's only half the story. I know. I know that there was some. I'd be careful about equating what Martin O'Malley did exactly. I know there's some similarities, and they brought some Ed Norris from New York City. We're not talking about broken glass policing here, broken window policing, which I agree with you is very effective. This was as much a case of just Martin O'Malley had a public policy to just arrest people. And if he just arrested people and took them off the streets, then that was going to reduce things. Most of them were never charged with anything. That's a little different than, focusing on petty crimes and quality of life crimes, which was done in New York City. That makes a whole lot of sense. And of course, the current mayor has exactly the opposite policy, which is let's arrest less people, even if they committed crimes, in the interest of making the statistics look better.
Well, that's part of it, and before all of this happened, Baltimore was back on track this year for 300 murders. So that certainly was the case, and certainly it was very, very lax policing on Saturday and on Monday that led to the widespread destruction and things getting out of control because the police, essentially, whatever the mayor says she said or claims she meant or whatever. The fact is that the police here were very clearly given rules of engagement to allow these rioters to destroy property, and they took full advantage of it and went beyond that.
Yeah, and of course she said it's only property.
And the thing is, yeah, it's only property, but it's not her property. These are residents that actually have invested in her city, and it's not her money either. The insurance companies will pay for it. The evil insurance companies. Yeah, right.
Well, that's of course none of that's true. And when you hear some of the stories, like there was, you've probably seen some of the stories about the shoe warehouse that the owner watched for 4 hours on his surveillance cameras this place getting looted, and the police did nothing, not one thing to interdict for 4 hours while this guy's watching his family's business being looted. You know, one of the things that isn't getting widely reported but is reported here is that during the riots, you know, there was a lot of involvement from local drug gangs who are now, you know, at the table trying to make peace, which is just extraordinary. But there are reports that there were gang leaders or gang members who were protecting African-American-owned businesses and directing looters to Asian-owned businesses. And there's no question that Asian-owned businesses were some of the hardest hit and most often looted on Monday.
Yeah, Greg?
And a lot of those folks who've been interviewed and talking to the press, you know, they don't have insurance that's going to replace a lot of this stuff.
Greg, this is Skip.
So, you know, that's one ugly aspect of this that isn't getting reported either, and kind of undermines, you know, what the mayor is saying is it's just property, because it was a little darker than that.
Yeah, Greg, this is Skip. You know, doesn't this kind of give lie once again to what Elizabeth Warren, the uber progressive senator from Massachusetts, who in her Warrenism rant said, "You didn't build that. We all helped to build that." And she said, you know, government is the entity that makes it possible for you not to have to hire people to protect your property, talking about business owners. And, you know, we saw that in Ferguson. Now we've seen it here. So, well, gosh, if government can't protect me and my property, what good is it?
Well, that's why you have to protect your own. And, of course,
Baltimore
absolutely.
is one. And, of course, in the city of Baltimore, they have very strict gun rules, and we do here in Maryland as well. So that was, even though you do have some business owners that you know, were able to do that and take advantage of what limited Second Amendment rights they have. But you know what? There's a dirty little secret. I had people asking me this week. I'm an attorney here in Maryland as well. You know, if the mayor is going to allow this stuff to happen, you know, can these business owners seek redress from the government, from the city?
Ooh.
And the answer is there have been courts that have ruled, this is kind of a dirty little secret, there are courts that have ruled that the government doesn't have an obligation to protect individuals, let alone property.
We've talked about that in New Hampshire a number of times.
The Supreme Court decision where police didn't have to protect the individuals. But, you know, in such an event as what's been happening in Baltimore, that's not just a single individual. That's a whole mess of people. You know, obviously the CVS store on fire caught national attention. And there's the police just standing there. Wouldn't that be evidence to be able to say, you didn't do your job?
Well, but the point is, as the courts have said, they don't have an obligation to stop it. Not one that's actionable anyway. I mean, I think they have a moral and, you know, constitutional obligation. But it's not like the CVS Corporation, which, by the way, you saw one on TV burn. There were actually a couple other drugstores in the city that burned at the same time that weren't, you know, live on air while we were watching it. But they're not going to be able to get recovery from the city. Now, that doesn't mean that at the end of the day that, you know, government and probably the state government's not going to step in and try to fix some of this mess. It's one of the things we've been talking about. Even once this unrest dies down and things return to normal, the cost of this is going to be enormous, and it's going to drive politics here in Maryland for some time.
Greg, we're going to take 60 seconds. Stay on the line. We'll be right back.
This is the Coalition of New Hampshire Taxpayers. We're located at 8 North Main in Concord, New Hampshire. This is the repository for all things conservative and municipal. So if you have a problem in your town, your school, your budget committee, the right to know law, and now, at the top of our list is voter fraud. You have a tip for us, some information for us, you want to join or help us out, cnht.org.